It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of self-reliance. An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
This is our country.
Greetings and welcome again to An Economy of One. I am your host, Gary Rathbun. Our website, aneconomyofone.com, as is our Facebook, An Economy of One. I'm going to get right into this. Been looking forward to talking with Don all day. Joining me now is Don Watkins. He's a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. He's co-author with Yaron Brook of the national bestseller, Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. His new book is Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality. He's also author of Roosevelt Care, How Social Security is Sabotaging the Land of Self-Reliance. And he's host of a podcast on inequality and the welfare state called The Debt Dialogues. Don, welcome to An Economy of One.
Great to be here.
I was glad to finally meet you face-to-face out to CPAC, and you showed me your new book. It was coming out in a month or so, and your publisher sent me a copy. It's a fascinating book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Great read. Very early in the book, you make the point that many people believe the inequality of income is unfair, and they assume the economic pie is fixed. Why is the concept of production and creativity so difficult for these people to grasp?
Well, I mean, it's just a general human phenomenon that we tend to take a lot of things for granted. I mean, think of how many marriages or relationships fail just because you take the other person for granted. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of work to remind yourself that, hey, guess what? These things aren't just given to you. They have to be created. And the world around us today, this amazing world we live in with, air-conditioned heating, airplanes, cars, all of that had to be produced. And there's many places in the world where it hasn't been produced. And so I think in any discussion of economics, the last place to start is in asking about what's going on with the distribution of wealth. You have to think about where does wealth come from? And then how do you nurture that? How do you protect the creation of wealth? And specifically, what do you owe the people who are creating it? And only later can you come to issues about distribution.
Now, excuse me, you make the point that the founding fathers established the nation based on the principle of political equality rather than economic equality. What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to think about when the founders arose, and so this was during the Enlightenment. And during the Enlightenment is when this idea of equality became a political value. Before that, it was just taken for granted. Some people are born rulers, and some people are born the ruled. And Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Algernon Sidney, and then ultimately the founding fathers, said, how do you justify that? Mm-hmm. What's the justification? And they said, no, you know what? We're different in all sorts of ways, but we're all fundamentally human beings with the same rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the government's job is not to have some privileged class rule us. It's to protect each of our equal freedom to pursue our own happiness. And when you do that, you get all the prosperity that we talked about a second ago, but you get it unequally because the fact is different people produce vastly different amounts of economic value. But that's okay because guess what? One person's fortune, if it's earned through productive achievement, doesn't come at my expense. It comes with my benefit.
Now, why is that political economy such an increasing threat in America? I mean, that income inequality, that's all we hear from the presidential candidates out there is how they're going to address the inequality, not what the good side of it is and why we need it. Why is this such a threat to America?
Well, you have to think about what is the program of the people who are pushing the idea of economic inequality. And in general, their basic goal is to expand the power of government, to give government more control over our choices and our life. And economic inequality is a very good demon to point to because I'm not a fan of William F. Buckley, but he once said something that was really brilliant. He said, you can't look at a person who pushes old ladies into the path of a bus and a person who pushes them out of the path of a speeding bus and equate them by saying that they like to push old ladies around. Well, economic inequality does the same thing. It groups together people who create inequality through producing wealth and people who do it through exploiting and stealing from others. And so if you want to expand the power of government, it's very easy to demonize the free pursuit of productive achievement. You just say they're creating inequality, and then you point to people like Bernie Madoff, or you point to people who are doing really nefarious things, or people getting special favors from government. And then basically, what's the solution? Well, we got to take out all these guys by reducing economic inequality, which really means give me more say over your wealth and over your freedom.
You know, another point you make in the book is that the 1%, the top 1% and the bottom 20% are fluid and constantly changing. That's a point I've made here on the show several times, is, you know, the 1% doesn't stay constant. They're constantly moving in and out, as does the bottom 20%. But this is another example of how statistics are used to draw a conclusion that sounds logical, but in reality is different from the reality that we look at. You do a great job in the book illustrating some of the other statistics and how they distort the inequality of income. Also, can you share some of your thoughts and analogies in this area as far as, you know, pre-tax and pre-transfer wages and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the general claim here is that we've been stagnating over the last 40 years. And the reason the inequality critics are so wedded to this idea is because that allows them to portray economic inequality as a zero-sum game. If they, you know, we talked about the way in which it's not, but if they can say, hey, look, all these guys have been gaining and none of us have, then they can make it sound like the economy works the way they pretend it works. And they'll point to statistics, and the statistics are not wrong per se. It's that you really have to think deeply about what they mean, because when they say that, you know, the middle class is making the same as they were in 1979, that does not mean a person starting in 1979 is making the same amount now. In fact, we have statistics that are actually try to measure what a given individual gets over the course of the last 40 years. And in general, what you see is something like a 40% increase. So what are they talking about? They're talking about a statistical category. And statistical categories can be very misleading. Let me just give a couple quick examples.
Sure.
So if immigration changes, if you get a bunch of low-skilled, low-pay immigrants who come into the country, now they might be making more than they were in their home country, and nobody else's income has changed, but what's going to happen to the median if they come and take low-paying jobs by American standards? It's going to go down, even though nobody got poorer. Or you can take the fact that the way that they measure these are through generally household incomes, and the composition of households has changed significantly since the 1970s. You had more divorces. And so if you have a couple where they each make $25,000 a year who get divorced, and let's even say they get a huge raise, they each are now making $35,000 a year, you're still going to see household incomes drop, because now instead of one household with $50,000, you have two households with only $35,000. So there's all these ways in which you can have misleading statistics when you look at aggregates. And so I think if you just look intuitively at how we live and how much better life is materially than it was 40 years ago, and then you realize that there are all these statistic shenanigans that can be played, it is utterly implausible that we've, quote, stagnated. Now, I do believe there's economic problems, and hopefully we can talk about them. I do believe that progress has slowed in certain ways, but to present it as if nobody's improved since the 1970s except for a few hedge fund managers, that is not honest.
Yeah, it's really deceptive what they do with the statistics. And, you know, I knew that, and I could think about that, but your book makes it really, really clear in the examples, just like the one you give, as far as household incomes and divorces and nobody taking into consideration the pre-transfers and what we get from the government. We're talking with Don Watkins. He's a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute and co-author of the new book, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Equality. One of the sections that caught my eye was titled The Equality of Opportunity Ruse. And in it, you make the point that equality of opportunity may sound appealing to some, but it forces the government to treat people unequally and give some an advantage over the other. In fact, you quoted, and I couldn't believe this, and I hope I get this right, you quoted a philosopher that said essentially that that it might be wrong for parents to teach their children to read because it might provide them with an unfair advantage in life. I mean, how messed up is this that's the thought process out there?
Well, to be fair to this creature, it wasn't teach them to read; it's to read to them at night. But yeah,
okay,
it's the same principle. No, but that's the egalitarian project. Egalitarians are all about leveling down because you can't lift everybody up to the same level.
Right.
I'm never going to be as great a CEO as Steve Jobs. My wife is an amazing teacher. I'm biased. I think she's the best teacher in history. But guess what? She's only teaching a few dozen kids a year. No way is she going to be equal to Jeff Bezos, who's providing economic value to millions of people a year.
Right.
So if you're treating equality as the ideal, you have to level down. Now, that doesn't mean that they advocate leveling everybody down completely equally, but they want to move in the direction of equality. And what that means at the end of the day is the more economic value you create, the more you achieve, the more you're going to be penalized. And I regard that as completely unjust. And that's why we say in the book that achievement is unequal, and so equal is unfair.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a few more questions for you, and I'm coming up on a break. Can you hang on through the break a little bit, Don, and chat a little bit more?
Be my pleasure.
I appreciate it. I'm Gary Rathbun. This is An Economy of One.
This is An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
We're speaking with Don Watkins. He's a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute and co-author of the new book, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Equality. Don, a little bit later in the book, you talk about some of the conditions that we need to overcome this. And in addition to freedom of thought and freedom of speech and freedom of contract, you talk about something near and dear to my heart. We talk a lot about here, and that's private property rights. And we talk about that consistency. What role does private property have in our whole discussion here about income equality and development of wealth?
I mean, it's critical, and this is something that the founders understood very well. In fact, I recommend everybody after they buy the book on Amazon, they should go look up an essay by James Madison called Property. It's really short, but the basic idea is that we are in part material beings, and we need material resources to live. And what property rights say is if you create those resources, they're yours. So the basic idea, right, is if I'm on an island and I break off a branch and sharpen it into a spear to catch fish, and then I catch 10 fish, if Friday runs over and grabs 6 of them for him to eat, that's wrong. He can't do that. And in society, we engage in a really complex division of labor, but it's the same idea. The economic value that you earn through your productive action belongs to you. And what the inequality critics want to do is basically say, no, property rights are different than other rights. That when it comes to property rights, it's deuces wild. The government gets to dictate how much money you have, not the free voluntary consent of the people you interact with. And so one of the consequences of that is that property rights are what really make possible progress, because it does 2 things. Number one, it gives you the resources with which to build a company or build an industry, and it gives you the incentive to do it. And so, for instance, if I want to start Google, and everybody's telling me the world doesn't need another search engine, well, it doesn't matter what they think. I can use my property and the property that people voluntarily turn over to me as investors in order to start my company and give it a go. And why are why are we going to do that? Think of the investors. Let's say you have $1 million. Wouldn't that be great? Are you going to hand it over to somebody just out of the goodness of your heart, or are you going to hand it over to them because you think you're going to get a return on your money?
Right.
Well, it's definitely the latter. So if we want investment, risk-taking, innovation, and entrepreneurship, you better protect property rights, because that is the backbone of economic progress.
I couldn't help but notice throughout the book you refer to Thomas Piketty and Paul Krugman, one of my favorite economists, as well as, and these 2 guys, as well as most of the presidential candidates, want to raise marginal tax rates. Bernie is saying 70, 80, 90% range. I know you see this as a moral issue rather than an economic issue. Tell us why this is a moral issue for you.
Well, for me, morality is about how does the individual live the best life possible? How do we achieve a successful and happy life? And if something is basically stopping an individual from doing that, I regard that as immoral. I regard justice as the guardian of an individual's ability to pursue his own happiness, so that if you do the work, you deserve the benefit. And so when you talk about marginal tax rates at the level of 80%, and in particular, let's remember what they want to do with these taxes. Like, if it's wartime and, it's the country's not going to survive and you need a military, all right, we can have a debate about whether or not, you should have tax rates like that. But what they want to do is explicitly two things. They say they want to help the poor sometimes, but which means we're going to take 80%, close to 80% of your money and just hand it over to other people because they didn't earn it. So that's unjust. But if you listen to people like Thomas Piketty, who you mentioned, he's explicit that tax rates that high actually don't garner that much tax revenue from the government. And he says that's not the purpose. The purpose is not to use the money to lift people up. It's to bring these people down. It's to end these large fortunes. And what that really means is that they've decided that if you've achieved a lot, your achievement shouldn't be celebrated. Rather, it's that you should be regarded as public property to be exploited for the good of society. Your hopes and dreams and your rights and freedoms don't matter if you're too successful. And that, nothing could be more immoral. If justice is about rewarding the good and punishing the bad, they want to punish the good and reward anything that hasn't lived up to the good.
And this is, a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of talking to one of your fellows at the Ayn Rand Institute, Peter Schwartz, about his book In Defense of Selfishness. And I've read Atlas Shrugged many times. I've studied a lot of the writings of Ayn Rand, and the meme out there today seems to be, if you want to take care of yourself and your family first, you're deemed selfish, un-American, or just plain evil. And this is not new. I mean, Ayn Rand wrote about this back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I mean, how do you respond to that thought?
I mean, you need a whole treatise to give a full response, but this is the one simple thing I tell people. When you're trying to evaluate that claim, don't put yourself in the shoes of the person trying to decide whether or not to help. This is not about help. One of the ways we pursue our happiness is helping the people and causes we care about. This is about entitlement. And the question is, if you needed an operation that you couldn't afford, would you feel entitled to somebody's money? Would you feel entitled to march up to your neighbor and go, I don't care if you can afford it. I don't care what your priorities are. You owe me because I'm in need. And I would venture to say that most Americans would never behave that way. And so if you can get people to see that that's what this is about, it's about entitlement, then I think that at least raises the question in their mind, is that moral? Because that's certainly not how they would behave in their own personal lives.
Yeah, it's, and that's an excellent answer, because we see that every day. I mean, just today or yesterday, whenever it was, Governor Brown out in California signed a statewide minimum wage law because these people need that to support their family. And he even said it's poor economic policy, but he was going to sign it anyway. And excellent thought. Terrific book, Don. Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality. We're going to put that on our website and Facebook and stuff. And appreciate all your time. And I hope we get a chance to chat again real soon.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. I'm Gary Rathbun. This is an Economy of One.
This is